Hi, I'm Andrea Angela and welcome to Productive C#. In this video, I want to talk how to use an unit to assert exceptions. So in this solution, I have a simple project and the goal is to test that the int.parse framework method throws exceptions in the right way. Of course, you can use this technique with any code that you have and you want to test, but for simplicity in this video, I'm just using a framework method. I'm sure you're all familiar with int.parse. Int.parse basically is a method that allows you to pass a string, and it's basically trying to convert a string into a number. So it's parsing the string into a number. Okay. As you can see from the documentation, this method can throw exceptions. Can throw an exception when you pass a null argument, when you pass an invalid string, and when it is an overflow exception when you pass like a number that is too big. Okay, so let's try to write this test and see how a unit helps you to do that. Before doing that, I want to tell you something. If you write some code that doesn't do any assertion inside the test method, what a unit does is that the test automatically passes if the code doesn't throw any exception. But if the code throws an exception, like let's say I pass null here, the test fails. So let's try and see. If I run this test, I didn't do any assertions, but this code obviously throws an exception because I'm passing null and that's not supported by parse. As you can see, the test basically fails. And you get a message that you get an argument null exception, the value cannot be null. Okay? So just keep in mind that if you put any code inside a test and you don't put any assertions, that's obviously not a good practice. The code will fail if the test will fail if the code throws any sort of exceptions. How can I make this explicit? I want to say that this test should pass when this code throws an exception, because it's actually what we want to test. The way to do that in a unit is using throws, and you can provide the type of exception you want. In this case, we want to test that we get an argument null exception. And then you pass a lambda with the code that you want to test. Okay, something like that. And we need to make sure that we actually add the using statement to get the using the argument null exception. Okay. Using system. There we go. So now this test should pass, because we know that parse null will throw an exception of type argument null exception, and we are certain that this code actually throws this exception. Perfect. Then NUnits allows you to also get the instance of this exception to do further assertions. So to do that, you can just do something like that. So the throws method returns the exception that is being thrown, and you can do additional asserts, like I want to check that, let's say I want to check that the message are equal number cannot be now. Don't remember the text. Let's see what happened. Something like that. Of course, this will fail because that's not the exact message, but you get the idea. You can actually assert against a particular test. Expected string was length 21, but it was 24. So we get expected number cannot be null, but we got all of this. One technique that I usually use when you want to test messages, it's very it makes the test too fragile if you want to test the entire message, but you might just want to test just a bit of a substring of a message. You can do in this case using string assert. String assert contains, and I want just to check that it contains cannot be null, right? So you can do that using string assertions. I usually don't tend to check the exception message when I do my test, but you can do it, especially if you have some information that you care that must be in the message, so you can check that these information are present in the message. There we go. Then let's now try to check that we throw a valid exception when we pass an invalid number. So again, I can just do assert.throws, and I put the type format exception. And then we pass int.parse, and we pass, let's say I put some letters. This definitely doesn't work, right? And it should actually work. one important thing I want to mention is that when you use the assert.throws, you are actually asserting that you get that exact type of exception. Okay, format exception inherits from system exception, and also inherit from exception. But if you do something like that, if you assert that you throws a system exception, even if the format exception inherits from system exception, this test will fail, and I'm gonna prove it in a second. Because throws test the specific type of exceptions. If you want to test any exception that inherits from a particular exception, you need to use assert.catch. Okay, so you could convert this into a catch, and that would have worked. See, right? So now I'm checking that into parse passing any letters, an invalid number, will catch, will throw any system exception. I don't really care what I'm saying with the test. I'm not really care about the type of exception it's thrown. As far as it's implementing system exception, I'm fine with it. And that's what the catch is about. Usually you want to be specific in the test. I tend to prefer assert.throws. I don't use catch as much, but just know that it's there. And with catch, you don't even need to specify the exception type. If you want to say catch any exception, so by default, and you will use exception. Okay, so now we know how to do things. So we know how to check if a number is too big, right? I'm gonna copy this line here because it's pretty much the same code. And instead of passing null, I'm gonna pass a big number like 3 billion. That I know that is gonna be bigger than an int, and I wanna check that this is actually throwing an overflow exception. And it should pass. Finally, let's run it. Never assume that a test pass. Okay, it's always important to run the test every time you change the code, or even before committing, because never trust your assumptions. That's why we write tests in the first place. The last things I want to mention is how can you check that a piece of code doesn't throw an exception. As I said, you could just simply write the code that you know that won't raise an exception, like parsing a valid number, but that would work because the test will pass, because pass 1 to 3 doesn't throw an exception, but it's not very explicit. So it's usually better to say exactly that you want to verify that that particular code doesn't throw. So you need to use does not throw. Okay, and then pass a lambda with the code that you want to check. So you are now explicitly saying that I want to check, assert that this code does not throw. Of course, if you write a complete set of tests, you will test the valid result of the parsing. But in this particular video, I'm basically showing you the exception methods. So I'm not going to do that. Okay, that's pretty much it. So these are all the information you need to know in order to write unit tests that assert that your code error handling and exception handling is correct. So you can check that your method throws an exception, that throws a particular type of exception, it throws any exception that inherits from a particular exception, and you can also assert that your code never throws an exception in this particular case with an unit. So it's fairly simple to use, very intuitive, and definitely it's very common to write this sort of code. So it's very important to test your validation code for every single method that you write. And that's everything for this video. Thank you very much for watching.